Welcome to the podcast is dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. The Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by Trainer Road. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hello.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
As you can tell, there are more than 3 of us today. You counted right. We also have Cannondale pro cyclist Amber Pierce with us.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, I guess we can give I'm going to give a brief background on you, but please correct me if I screw it up. First of all, you're actually from this region.
Yeah.
And I believe you and Nate swam together in high school even, right?
Sorta.
Yeah.
She was in like a special club.
She was super fast.
Yeah, and I was in the slow lane. Like she didn't even swim the same pool because you were so fast.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Well, yeah, I had like a waiver for the physical education component of it to go
Nice.
with my coaches. Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to get into a bit of the swimming stuff too in just a little bit. But first of all, you're a 2-time collegiate national champion.
Mm-hmm.
You have over 10 years of racing in the pro peloton as a domestique. You've supported world champs and Olympic medalists. It's pretty impressive stuff. 60 race wins across 5 continents.
Mm-hmm.
I have not that many wins across one continent. And then, so right now, you've ridden for a bunch of different pro teams, but you ride for Cannondale, Mavic, Storrs Cycle Center, Bike Flights, Cliff Bar, Athlos, and Unior. Is that how you say
Junior.
it? Junior.
Mm-hmm.
What's junior?
Yeah,
You're close.
Yeah, what's Junior? You can explain that more.
It's bicycle tools.
Oh,
and they're
cool.
manufactured in Slovenia. Really, really nice. They have obviously a factory there and everything, but it's really, really nice stuff. Yeah, and they've just recently, in the last few years, started distributing to the U.S. So,
Cool.
highly recommend.
So you spent a good amount of time racing over in Europe, and you have, and we're going to get into all of your experience there over in Europe, which is going to be, I feel like, fascinating for all of us. But then, of course, you being a female cyclist and us 3 being very much not females, we don't delve into a lot of topics that are specific to female cycling because we don't want to speak out of our realm of experience. We don't want to be people that are weighing in on things that we really have no firsthand experience on. So it'll be great to have your insight on that. Going into your athletic background prior to cycling, you swam when you were younger, but then also that is really what you went to, I believe you went to Stanford for, like swimming was one of your main focuses there, right?
Yep.
So that's like whenever I hear that a person was like a really good swimmer, I think, well, that person's like really, really fit. Right?
Didn't you win a bunch of stuff at Stanford or not?
I actually struggled a little bit when I was there. But my freshman year was probably better than my sophomore year. I ended up having shoulder issues essentially right when I got there, which was probably cumulative from having started swimming when I was 10, but it just really started breaking down a little bit when I got there.
Is that why you went into cycling?
Pretty much, yeah.
So, okay, I haven't asked you this yet, but why? So are you retired now as a pro cyclist?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. Kona World Championship. If you are a swimmer,
That's true.
and then you're a pro cyclist and you've won races, and are you a good TTer?
I'm a very good DTer. The problem is the run.
It doesn't matter.
Oh.
You're going to be so far ahead of everyone.
You have not seen me run.
No, you can do that. That's the easiest. So of all those things, cycling's pretty easy too, but to teach someone, but you have the swimming background, cycling's a little bit harder. Like anyone can learn to run. I swear.
Yeah,
Like,
I feel
it's of all the skills.
and
like,
everyone runs differently. Like you see like very fast people running differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I bet you could walk, run, at least qualify for Kona. Yeah. What's
for sure.
How old are you?
37.
37. Yeah. So getting that like 3 years from now, that 40, because you got to beat the lowest, and then it's the biggest advantage.
Yeah, exactly.
It can happen.
That's the age group tactics right there.
Sorry. Yeah.
Nate's tips on age group tactics. I like
Well,
that.
everyone
It's
does
smart.
that, right?
Yeah, it's
but
smart,
actually,
yeah.
in the this is the segue. But in the women's field, some women get faster when they're 40 compared to when they're younger. Like the 35 and 40-year-olds will be faster than the 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that holds true at Kona, but in regular races, it totally holds true. And actually, in our own usage data, it holds true too.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, like for watt per kilo, older women are higher than younger women.
It's interesting, right? I wonder how much of that has to do with just the other aspects of life affecting how much you can train or the consistency, that you can train at. Because I feel like, so right now, and sorry, we're digressing a bit.
Already.
Nate calls it
Right.
We said we have this spreadsheet, and I said as soon as we start, we're just not going to do it.
Nate calls it a segue. Really, it's a digression, but we can just bring it back in. But the interesting point on this is like, so I've moved into the 30-year-old age group for nationals, and at this point it's like so interesting. Your competition entirely changes. Because now it's not just like fast young people, but I'm dealing with either pros that have retired, and they retired. Yeah, you guys are a pain to race. Or you're dealing with people that, like, when you get into the 40s, you're dealing with lawyers, doctors, those sort of people that have the sort of, or at least they own a hedge fund, something like that, where they can stand back and they really don't do much day to day.
They train like a pro.
And they can just train like a pro. So it's as age groups change, you end up your competition entirely changes, and it's not obviously the people change, but the type of person you're racing changes.
I'm going to pressure you to do that. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and then at Kona you can be on
pretty
an
good at that
episode in Hawaii with us.
It's true.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, that's a pretty good draw.
So I want to get into I guess the women's pro peloton a bit.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, like, I know they have the Secret Pro that you can see on
Is that
on
you?
cycling
It's
tips.
not me.
There's
Let's clear that up right now.
Yeah, there's the Secret Pro and there's a ton of articles on that. Then every once in a blue moon, you get like a Secret Pro one where it's somebody from the women's peloton. But we, as cycling fans and as non-pros, know very little about what it's like inside the women's pro peloton.
Yeah.
And I think that, we really focus on helping people get faster with this podcast, and we're going to tie in a lot of this, but the context of it I think is really important. Like, when you're talking about like pro, like fast, you don't have to share any names, of course, but like top level women in that field, what are they at in terms of like watt per kilogram, like the top performers? You may have to guess, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifics on certain people or anything like that. I do know that from working with my coach, who's worked with a lot of top-level women, that some coaches out there, for example, in a time trial, will look at trying to get, if they're coaching somebody for a world championship, they're trying to get as close to 5 watts per kilogram as possible in the TT. And I think there are a lot of limitations with that, just physiologically, not just in terms of physiologic capacity, VO2 max and things like that, but also just like body size. Like, I'm really tall. It's really hard for me to get lighter than somebody who's maybe 5'2". And although I might have some more mechanical advantage as far as being able to put out power, there are huge variations in that. So I think it's not necessary to get to that point. And I do know a lot of women who, have medaled at world championships, for example, who were not at that watts per kilogram. There's a lot of other factors that go into that. Obviously, you guys have talked about aerodynamics, and then in the mass start races, skill and tactics play such a huge role that I think it's fair to say that in the women's peloton, at least, there's a massive range of, for example, FTPs.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about that is because the skill and the tactics make such a difference, there are opportunities for virtually anyone once you get to a certain level.
How tall are you?
5'10".
Yeah, so is that tall in the pro peloton?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right?
Oh, yeah. There have been many a time when my luggage has been lost and I've had to borrow clothes from my teammates. It's not good.
I can see that, especially racing in places like Italy or something else like that, where people are tiny little people, right? Yeah. So when you talk about, let's go back to watt kg really quick. So a lot of the time we're talking about power to weight ratios, and we always, and it seems like we always talk to them somewhere around 4 to 5 watts per kilogram. But for a pro women athlete, could she be below 4 watts per kilogram and be competitive? Or is there any sort of like floor to that, do you think, roughly? Of course it varies, but
I would think there is probably floor. I don't know what it is. And I think that you can actually get away a lot with skill. So especially in some of the European races, the roads are super narrow and they're really, really technical. And being able to position yourself well or manage cobblestones or corner well in the rain, those are the things that will put you in a position to make selections that, even somebody who's stronger than you would have an easier time making the selection. If they can't physically be in the position to do that, you're out of luck. So I think, I don't know what the floor would be, but I think there's a lot of variability there.
How do you corner well in the rain?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, the phrase that I always use involves a cuss word, so I won't do that right now. All your friggin' weight on the outside leg.
Yeah.
And it's a really basic concept that we talk about all the time, but it's so easy to forget. And it's so easy to not do that when it's dry out and to get into a habit of being a little bit complacent about it. But if you really weight that outside leg, it's hard to slide out actually on a bike unless you have like a thin layer of diesel on the road or something like that, which can be a factor, or paint.
So that's a habit you try to instill even on dry roads?
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you shift your body weight on your saddle then when you take those, like, because I've noticed on when you do those kind of turns, if I almost feel like if I'm turning right, and if I pull my right hip back a little bit, like I'm kind of turning into the hips into the turn,
right,
it makes it so there's like 20 or 30% more weight on that outside pedal. I don't even know if that's good technique or not, but do you do that? Do you shift in your saddle as you turn?
I might. I think the thing with cornering that's important is to not overthink it.
Uh-oh.
That's a tough one for Nate.
and the thing with cornering, so I'll tell you a quick story. I had a director one year who was not a nice person, and really got in my head about my cornering. And my cornering is something that I've been good at since I started in cycling. And so for this whole season, every corner, I was just second guessing myself. And my coach at the time was coaching me. He's based in Australia, so I went to Perth over the winter and was training with him, and I was like, we got to get this cornering thing down. I don't know what's going on. And so he said, okay, show me what you normally do. And I did it. And he was like, well, that's right.
You're fine.
And I was like, are you kidding me? And he said, yeah, the thing with cornering is the end justifies the means. If you get through the corner fast, whatever you did works. So it doesn't necessarily help to overthink it. On the other hand, there are certain principles and body positions that will either help or hinder you. And the nice thing about the all your friggin' weight on the outside leg is that if you have all your weight on the outside leg, it's naturally going to put your shoulders and your hips in the right position. So people talk about counter steering, and you can kind of lean your arms in and your shoulders out and things like that. You can get pretty detailed with that, but if you just put all your weight on that outside leg, everything is going to fall into place. And the other piece of that is look where you want to go.
That is such good advice. Like, whenever people start talking about counter steering, I always just want to tell them to stop, because
too much information.
you're going to take care of it.
Much.
Your body's going to counter steer. If you even think to actually proactively counter steer, you're going to screw everything up, because it's such a subtle movement that it's not something that you can actually actively do and then replicate.
I've tried. It doesn't work.
When you put
everything right now is in terms of skiing, because we'll talk about this next week. We just got back from a long ski trip, and you point your shoulders down the hill. And doing that one thing puts so many other things in line that you don't have to consider.
Yeah,
it's like the keystone.
Really, yep. Yeah, and so something interesting with that too. When you put all your weight on the outside, that inherently puts less weight on the saddle with your pelvis, and you have it's not a disconnection in the sense that you're standing off of your saddle, but it's a disconnection in the sense that your pelvis isn't banking on being supported by that saddle, because you're supporting on that pedal. So then what happens is when you hit that bump, and how many times have we seen this in races that we've seen, whether it's a local race or something on TV, when a person's going through a turn, and what causes them to crash is they hit a bump, it bumps their pelvis up, and then it causes a weight shift, and then they end up sliding out, right? But when all of your weight's on that outside pedal and your pelvis isn't firmly just sitting on that saddle, your saddle can bump around, your bike can bump around. It's okay, because your body stays, which is the majority of the weight, it stays where it needs to be. Right. It's a big difference.
Going back to Watt KG, there's a faux pas in our culture of asking women their weight, and I'm just going to break it. We've already talked about this, but I think it's important, because I think there's a thought that to be a women's pro racer, you have to be like 110 pounds.
Oh gosh, no. Yeah.
Right? But is that do people think they have to be like chase? Do you find that women chase lightweight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I think every sport has like kind of a stereotypical ideal body type or body shape that you kind of think that once you're in that sport, that's what you should aspire to be. And I mean, so I'm definitely heavier than now than I normally would be. So I'm probably around 155 pounds right now. And my race weight varied anywhere between like 145 to 150. 145 was hard for me to maintain during the season. But I mean, that's not 110 pounds. Like, and I'm not a pure climber, but I built a 12 plus year career out of being a domestique and an all rounder. And I can climb. I can get over climbs, and I've beat climbers. I've won on mountaintop finishes before. I think the main thing, and I think this is a trap that people fall into, is especially in cycling. There are, we talk about, I mean, cycling is, chess, and I'm sure you guys have talked about that, and everybody has different strengths, and especially if you're on a team and you're working together. there are different roles to play, and every race is different. So you're not always going to be finishing on a mountaintop. So you don't necessarily have to be a pure climber to win races. In fact, sprinters tend to win more races than climbers do. And sprinters don't have to be crazy, crazy light. In fact, oftentimes it's to their detriment if they try to get too light. I think the more important thing, and I talk to athletes about this all the time, first of all, everyone's physiology is different. So your physiology isn't necessarily going to preclude you. Like, I'm 5'10", I'm not the stereotypical cyclist. Cyclists are generally like really petite, really lean. And I mean, I got lean for my frame. But it certainly, I don't embody that kind of stereotypical cyclist body. And I think on the women's side, more than the men's side too, you see a much broader range of body types and body shapes. And you can't necessarily look at a professional female cyclist and say, oh, she's a climber, she's a sprinter, she's a TTer. I think it's a little bit easier to do that with the men. I don't know what the reason for that is, but if you look at the women's peloton and some of these women, I mean, Allison Powers, she's also really tall. She's a former downhill ski racer. She's like me. I mean, we are not petite. And she won climbing races. Ina Teutenberg is another great example of that. So I think you can't necessarily just chase a certain body type. And then I was going to follow up on that earlier about physiology being individual.
Yeah.
The thing is, our bodies are so much smarter than we are.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that whether it's cycling or swimming or triathlon or whatever sport it is that you're doing, I think it's really important to do the training that you need to do and then give your body the fuel that it needs to accomplish the training.
Yeah.
And if you just give your body what it needs, it will optimize your physiology and your shape for what you're trying to do. And it will do a much better job of optimizing than you will. And it might not be the shape that you were hoping for, or the shape that you see in magazines, or the shape that you see, a particular pro rider that you admire. Your shape might be different, but that doesn't mean that it's not optimized for you.
Or the scale number might be different.
Yes.
There's a huge there's lots of threads on our forum right now about people asking to lose weight, because it's being the season, and a bunch of people, myself included, fuel the workouts. And then for these people, including myself, body composition just happens, and you get so much stronger than trying to chase losing a whole bunch of body fat from a low scale number. And the power drops. All the workouts are incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Have you ever done workouts or races under fueled?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
You had a great story.
Yeah, that's a good part. I remember that one.
Yeah. So there are definitely. So over in Europe, there's different ideas about fueling and body composition, and I certainly had times where the soigneur would be doing a leg rub or something, and then just kind of pinch the side of your thigh and be like, oh, you could probably stand to lose a couple kilos here, a couple kilos there, which is not cool. And
no.
Thankfully by the time that was happening, I was old enough to know better, and it didn't really bother me. But I remember at a race one year, we were racing Tour of Flanders, which is super hard and really intense and really long, and it goes from the gun. There's a very short period at the beginning of the race where it's a little bit chill, but then it's a massive fight for position, and every time you're going into a cobble sector, it's a all-out sprint just to get into position for the cobble sector. So it's massive calorie.
That's why that race is so fun to watch. It's they're 27 finish lines in some respects, because you're constantly fighting to get into different sectors. Yeah,
and
it's so key.
So not only are you, putting out a huge physical effort, but the mental effort to focus and to know where you are and to be picking your line through the peloton, it's huge. So you need a ton of carbohydrate to meet this need.
Yeah.
So I remember I went to my director and I asked for 6 gels, which would not nearly be enough to get a person through this race, but I was thinking at least it would get me through the first part where my job was important. And the director looked at me and said, oh no, Amber, you can only have one. I was
oh my gosh.
What? No, you can only have one, and only in the last kilometer. I was
oh no.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So I had to go over to the U.S. national team, which was parked a few, in the same parking lot, just hey guys, can I have some extra gels?
I've heard that referred to as Belgic many times. So
do you find that thinking in the pro peloton, in the women's pro peloton, is that pervasive, or is it old school versus new school?
I think it's both. I think it's old school versus new school, but I think that a lot of women just have this idea. Body image is huge for everybody, period, but it's also really important in sport. And I've struggled with this too. I am bigger, and it was hard for me oftentimes to be, up on the stage when we're doing team presentation before a race, and I'm 6 to 8 inches taller than everybody else on my team.
I know how that feels.
And you understand. Yeah. And it just kind of sometimes it made me feel like, okay, I don't have the typical body, and so sometimes it would undermine my confidence. Like, well, people probably look at me and don't even think I look like an athlete, and I'm several years into a professional career, and I still feel like that. And I think for a lot of women, especially, that's a really big deal. So I think a lot of women do probably restrict calories too much, and more toward the goal of trying to lean out or reach a certain body type that they think that they need to have. Yeah. And I think the more, and I'm sure you've seen this too, what's more effective is just chasing the performance.
Yeah.
If you fuel the performance in your training ride every day and you perform well in each training session that you do, that makes a good day. A few days builds a good week. A few weeks build a good month. And then all of a sudden you've got this amazing season under your belt. Yeah. But if you're restricting calories to the point that you're compromising your performance in your training even, let alone in the races, you're not going to be as prepared for the races. And then you get to the race and, okay, hopefully you're feeling well for the race too. But, all of those little compromises along the way add up.
It makes so I think that it's a much more, it's like, I want to recap this and like reinforce it. We're talking about chasing performance rather than chasing a scale number, rather than chasing a specific body type or a specific look.
Yes.
And when you're talking about performance in cycling, because it is a discipline that in the end boils down in many respects to power and weight, it is very tempting to do the other side of things. But I've found that if you are, like you said, fueling your workouts, and you talked about, a few good workouts bleeds into something else and into something else, but your training is more enjoyable. You're looking forward
so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, you're looking forward to your workouts. You have enough energy thereafter as well to then be able to carry on with the rest of life's responsibilities.
Yeah.
And you are happier. That's what it is. And it's not that eating more makes you happier. It's just eating enough and fueling your workouts. And I think that all of us, male, but especially I think the pressure that sits on females in the world of cycling specifically, we are very guilty of dropping on the underside of that equation and under fueling. But it's not just, not only will it make for better workouts. My point is it makes life better in general.
So Amber, so how do you fuel for workouts and races? And then I'd like to know too, kind of the food that you would eat not during workouts and races.
Yeah. So a couple things. A friend of mine told me this rule of thumb, which I thought was really, really great. Your breakfast and what you eat during your ride should add up to at least what you burn on your ride. And she'll actually try to pack 1,000 calories into her breakfast before even getting out on the bike. That can be hard to do.
Yeah.
I can do it.
There's no doubt.
I find that adding a lot of maple syrup is a nice shortcut to that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Those calories, are we talking about mostly carbs then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That can be hard for like anyone, male and female.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, I tell people about that, like eat 1,000 calories of mostly carbs. It blows their minds. They're like, I'll get fat. I can't do it.
Yeah. Well, carbs are having this real moment right now where they're being
they are having
very maligned.
Yeah.
And I think there's an important distinction to make here. If you're someone who doesn't exercise a lot, reducing carb intake can definitely help with controlling weight and things like that. So that's not bad. If you're looking at somebody on the opposite end of the spectrum, like a professional level athlete, we're eating we're basically eating to give ourselves diabetes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just, it's crazy the amount of sugar and carbohydrate that we take in. So you have to adjust this based on, what your training regime is. But I think that if you are training regularly, carbs are super important. And you mentioned mood and everything else in life. It is so important to not compartmentalize your training from everything else in your life, because we are whole human beings, and everything that's going on in your life off the bike is going to affect how you perform on the bike. So if you're restricting, I'll get back to the food in a second, but like if you're restricting carbohydrate to the point where it's affecting your mood, it's affecting your relationships, that's going to cause emotional stress and other issues, which are going to affect you on the bike.
Absolutely.
You can't avoid that. And so it's a two-sided thing. One is you want to fuel for good training, but also, so that you actually enjoy the rest of your life, because that will make you perform better in your next training session and in your races. It's going to make you feel better about yourself and more confident, which we all know is a huge portion of performance. And then the flip side of that is you need to account for, and this is getting more into training stress, but I think this this has to do with nutrition too, because it's really easy for us to look at TSS score, or, okay, so here's my training stress, like this is what I need to be, how I need to balance my recovery for this training stress score. Well, if you're having a crazy stressful day at work and there's, something going on with the family, I mean, that's a lot of mental and emotional stress on top of that. And as athletes, I think it's really easy to be like, okay, I'm just going to put that stuff in a box. I'm going to go do my training ride.
Yeah.
But even though you're putting that in a box, your body isn't.
Yeah.
And your body is going to respond to mental and emotional stress physically the same way that it does to your training stress. And that's going to affect your endocrine system, and that's going to affect your training, and it's going to affect everything. So when you're looking at recovery and nutrition, you have to be taking into account whole life stress, not just what you're doing on the bike. And that's really important. And one of the things that comes up, like I was saying, Flanders, for example, it's a really technical race. There's a much higher cognitive load during that race. That's mental stress. People forget your brain actually uses more glucose than any other organ in your body, and it uses it fast. And when you're focusing more and you're having to think harder, it's using more. So that means you need more carbohydrate.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the cognitive load thing. I want to come back to that one because I think that at the end we'll talk like some tactics and some other fun stuff like that. On the nutrition side, it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that, when your breakfast and then what you eat on the ride should add up to what you're going to, or I should say meal prior plus what you
At
eat
least
on the ride.
you said.
Yeah. And I don't see that a lot in amateurs at all, including myself.
But all the time in pros.
All of them.
All
of
right?
them.
Yeah.
They like,
Keegan.
Carbs
all day.
Like even we
Like
went
tons of pancakes for breakfast.
Amazing.
And he's so lean.
Yeah.
It blows. You would show that to like the person who, like the common person who doesn't see cyclists, and they say, this athlete eats this many pancakes. What should they look like?
Yeah.
And they would say, oh, that's carbs. They're going to be
huge.
Yeah, 300 pounds.
And then Keegan gets in the bod pod sensor and it throws an error code. It doesn't even work.
Dead human.
Yeah, exactly. So he was actually, that's funny you say that. He had a picture the other day and he said, I wonder if I can fit 7 pancakes on my griddle. So yeah, he takes them in. But so even riding with Jeff Kabush on an enduro ride, you'd think, and it wasn't like a training day, right? But every time we'd get to the bottom of the trail and then we'd start pedaling back up to the top, we'd get to the bottom and he'd already have a gel or a waffle or something else out, and he would be eating that on the way up. And then and the same thing. And then afterward, he didn't gorge himself on food thereafter, after the ride. He had just enough for recovery. And then after that, I think that he had like cheese, crackers, meat, basically like charcuterie board, right?
Yeah.
And that was like it thereafter. And I think this is where I see like the pro eats a lot during the ride. And then thereafter, they're more or less normal. But then us average Joes, we don't eat enough during the ride, and then we go to Waffle House afterward, right? And we just gorge ourselves, and that's like that weird. That's not healthy for our body to just throw it through those crazy cycles like that. It's smart to fuel it. So I'm sure that you've had like some nutrition sponsors, but are there specific things like have you found that like gels work, or do you take in your carbohydrate through mixes in a bottle, or do you use solids? How have you done it throughout your career?
I really struggled. I mean, racing, I would use gels and Cliff Blocks. I really, really like Cliff Blocks because they're easy to chew and get down. And I think that it's important to have a mix, especially for longer rides and longer races. It's important to have a mix between solid and gels or carbohydrate in your bottle, because there's something about having that bolus of food that's like a time release, right? So, if you're having carbohydrate just in your mix, like that's going straight through. But if you have some, maybe a bar, I have a hard time with bars. Just being able to chew and breathe at the same time is like, it's really hard. So the blocks for me were really easy because I could just stick them in the side of my cheek, chew them up a little bit, swallow. And then you have like a bolus of food that's sitting in your stomach that's being digested a little bit slower than, say, a gel or something in your bottle. And that gives you a little bit of a time release. I do think that for on the bike stuff, especially during races, it's important to stick with really simple carbohydrates. And the reason for that is just it's the easiest thing. I mean, your body's going to be able to absorb it quickly, and that's really the most important thing that you're burning and needing at that time, in addition to electrolytes too. So I think it's something that's pretty personal. If you can eat bars, I think that's really good to do kind of early on in the ride or early on in the race, and then start switching closer to like less and less solid foods towards the end. And, to your point about eating early and often, well, first of all, so eat early and often when
Good
you're
rule.
on the bike, because it's not just about the calorie replacement. It's also about signaling. So you guys might have already mentioned this study previously. There was like it was like the mouth rinse study. So they were rinsing them out with like a carbohydrate solution. So what that showed was it wasn't necessarily the calories you were ingesting, but the signaling to your brain that you have fuel incoming. And so when you're out on a training ride and you're writing these checks, our brains, again, really smart, they're making this quick calculation the whole time of, okay, this is how hard we're working. This is how much is coming in. Wow, this is really out of whack. We got to start dialing it back. And without you really even being consciously aware of it, you're going to start holding back.
Totally.
And so to avoid that, eat early and often. One of the nutritionists I work with had me have a gel 10 minutes before I'd ride, and then I'd have to have a second one within 20 minutes of starting the ride. And I'd shoot for every 20 to 30 minutes having a gel or blocks.
Well, now, would you only do that on hard days or all days?
Most days. In part because it's a habit that I want to create and build, so that on race day I'm not spacing out and I don't have to think about it. And I also think that it's important too, because no matter what I'm doing that day, I'm going to perform better if my blood sugar level is up. And again, mood is a component of this too. If you start bonking in the middle of a ride, physiologically that's destroying you, but also your mood's going to tank, and then that's a day that's going to be like a black mark on your memory, when you're going into a race. When you build positive day, positive day, positive day into positive week, positive month, then by the time you get to race day, that's like 90% of your confidence.
Yeah.
So mood during your ride is also really important. But yeah, so.
Yeah. Do you know how many calories an hour you'd probably shoot for?
I think as far as carbohydrate, you can only process, I think there's like a ceiling, it's like roughly 100 grams. 100 grams, you can't really do much more than that.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to experiment and train yourself to try to get as close to 100 grams per hour as you can without GI distress, obviously. And again, you can kind of preload with your breakfast and then try to keep up as much as you can during the ride. And then the other thing I would say that's super, super important is a recovery shake. Or a recovery drink of some kind that includes protein and carbohydrate. Those are the most important things. And you maybe want that to have a little bit less fat. I am not a fan of trying to avoid fats in any way, shape, or form. I think it's really, really important. But for that recovery shake, fat takes so long to digest, so it's good to have that protein and carbohydrate.
So how often would you do recovery shakes during your pro career?
Every single ride.
Or what would you do?
It depended each year, but actually I'd do like a scoop of drink mix with plain whey protein and a lemon lime mix with plain whey protein. I would measure it out so that I would get a 4-to-1 ratio, or sorry, what is, yeah.
Yeah, 4-to-1.
4-to-1. Yeah, the 4-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein. And lemon lime and plain whey ends up tasting like key lime pie. So it sounds terrible, but it's cheap and easy. And
that's like, you just saved a lot of people a lot of money. Because recovery drinks are usually a ton, but that's good. That's a good tip.
Yeah, I like that one. Can we talk a little bit about it's coming out a bit on the men's side, but there's really not a whole lot of talk about it. But since we're on the topic of nutrition and we're talking about balancing, the health with training and everything else on the eating disorder side of things, it seems within culture that it's more common to hear women speaking about eating disorders than men. Yeah. But I guess that what I'm really focused on, at least with this question, is because I'm sure, all of us, it's very tricky to have a healthy relationship with food as a cyclist. It's pretty tough to do. But I'm hoping that, if somebody's listening to this and has something where they've been battling something like that, have you seen cyclists, athletes, effectively do anything that has helped them effectively manage eating disorders? Or are there any principles that you, or sayings or anything else that you kind of stick by to help stave off any sort of temptation for something like that?
It's hard, and I do think it's very pervasive. And I think it's pervasive as much for men as it is for women. I think that it's more socially acceptable for women to talk about it because it's something that's been acknowledged as we have all these magazines telling us that we should look a certain way, but this goes equally for men too. And I think that's hard. And I think, again, it's less socially acceptable for men, and that makes it really, really difficult. There's a big difference between disordered eating and eating disorders. So eating disorders are a psychiatric illness, and they're very, very serious. This is not something to mess around with. If you think that you might be on the verge of that, or you might be there, get help. And a really good resource is NEDA. It's the National Eating Disorder Association, and it's just NEDA.org. Really, really awesome resources there, either for you or for somebody that you might be worried about. Of psychiatric illnesses, I think eating disorders have the highest mortality rate.
Oof. Wow.
Yeah.
And so it's really important and it's really serious. It's not necessarily something, so what causes an eating disorder, there's environmental factors, but there are very real biological factors too. So this isn't just something that you choose to do. It's not a matter of how disciplined you are with your eating. This is like a real illness. Disordered eating can lead to an eating disorder, obviously, but there's a lot of gray area there. And there's a lot of gray area between discipline and disordered eating too, which is why it can be really helpful to go check out a website like NEDA.
Can I, not to derail you, NEDA.org?
Yes.
I'm getting National or New England Dressage Association.
Hang on a second. Google NEDA.
We can.
As Amber looks
we'll
that
have
up.
it in the
We'll
form.
find it.
We'll have
Yeah.
it in form.trainer.com.
We'll get back to that. It's very important. But it's a really great resource to, did you find it?
NationalEatingDisorders.org.
Okay,
There we go.
NationalEatingDisorders.org.
Plural disorders.
Has really, really great information on what constitutes disordered eating and what to look out for and what the risk factors are. But body image, like we were talking about, it's a major risk factor. And body image is super important for men and women in sport. And so I think it's not something, if you're predisposed to it, you have a lot of risk factors, you're in this environment, it's going to be a tough battle.
Yeah.
But the thing about eating disorders is they're 100% treatable. 100%. Like you might have a biological disposition for it, but that is not your fate. Like you can definitely get help and work on this and heal from this. So it's not all doom and gloom, but there are, so reading up on it, getting some resources like that. One of the things I think is really, really important is just to develop a good support network. And this is something that I would say to anybody getting into the sport, and even if you've been in the sport for a really long time. For us in the pro peloton, it was really hard because you'd be on a team, you'd make great friends, you'd have this whole support network with your teammates and your staff, and then contract season rolls around. It's like musical chairs, and then the next thing you know, you have a different director, different staff, different teammates, and every year it's different and it's shifting. And so what I realized pretty early on, and thankfully I had some great mentors, was it's really important to have a support network that's portable.
Yeah.
So people who are going to be in your corner and really have your best interest at heart 100% of the time, no matter what team you're on, no matter who your director is, no matter who your sponsors are, and have those people who are kind of independent third parties who really have your back. And I think a coach is a big part of that. But friends, parents, family, even former teammates, even if you're not on the same team anymore, having people that you can open up to and talk about this stuff with and who you trust to give you honest feedback to is really important.
For the eating disorder side, I've talked to I don't want to mention him now, his name, but a very high-level male pro, talked about, yes, he had it. They're so prevalent in male cycling, and nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
I want to get him on. We have to do it so he can talk specifically about male eating disorders. But like, you might, as a guy, you might think that like, oh, this is, nobody's like this, and I'm like this, and there's like shame involved and that sort of stuff. But it's not the case.
No.
It's very, very prevalent.
Yeah. How would you classify, I guess, then disordered eating in comparison to something that's more of like a
discipline?
Or I should say, when you have eating disorders and then somebody that has like disorder or that's experiencing disordered eating, like what would you classify as disordered eating?
There is an actual definition for this, so I don't want to attempt that because I'm not sure I'll get it quite right.
In your own realm of experience, or from what you've seen from other people, in your own words. Yeah.
I think you start crossing over when your relationship with food shifts, and that sounds really cheesy, but when food stops becoming a source of enjoyment and fuel and maybe a social aspect, if it starts becoming a source of anxiety and a mechanism for control and guilt and shame, then you're starting to spiral towards disordered eating. And I think that those are some good early warning signs. And so, coming up with I think working with a nutritionist could be really helpful, because sometimes, I know for me, that was part of the reason I reached out to a coach early on. I was fortunate enough that in collegiate cycling, I had some really great teammates who were kind of teaching me training principles and racing tactics. But the big difference for me with having a coach, and I ended up reaching out to a nutritionist for the same reason, was I overthink things all the time, so I'm constantly second guessing myself. And so if you're constantly second guessing, like, am I eating right? Am I eating enough calories? Am I not eating enough calories? Like, working with a nutritionist who can just take the guesswork out of it for you and say, this is what you need to do. That can help a lot with the second guessing. And then working with a nutritionist as well can help you recognize if there are any red flags.
And how do you find a good nutritionist?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a hard challenge.
It is a hard challenge. The nutritionist that I worked with, Kyle Pfaffenbach, Pfaffenbach, is really, really good.
Didn't expect that one.
He's really great. And I'll just tell you the story of when we first started working together, because I think this was a really good sign. In our first conversation, we were doing the consult, and he's like, okay, well, the way that I operate is everybody's different. And we have to accept from the get-go that metabolism is a black box and nobody understands how it works, which is not necessarily what you would want to hear from an expert.
Trust me, I know nothing on the matter.
But honestly, I found that so refreshingly honest, because it's true. No one knows how this stuff works.
Yeah.
And we do have a lot of scientific literature, and from that we can distill out some things that are, and this was what he said. He said there are some basic scientific principles that are generally agreed upon, and that the evidence supports. We'll start there, and then we'll see how it affects you.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there. So working with a nutritionist who's not going to tell you on day one, I have all the answers, but they're going to guide you through the trial and error process of figuring out what works for you. And I think that that's a pretty good litmus test.
I found I was working with a nutritionist for a bit this year. Basically, we just tried to get myself like sorted and kind of like, okay, this is like a proper pattern. This is how you respond to certain things. And then it was just a short-term thing, and it was actually really effective for me. Yeah. But, having a person to check in on could be helpful. But one of the big things that I found in trying to find every nutritionist that I could in this region is if I found extreme, like polarized evidence of any sort of like, whoa, like this person's like very fatty, like going toward fads, or they're very much, polarizing toward a lot of carb and absolutely nothing else, or no carb and all protein, something like that.
Yeah.
Those are probably good signs that person may not be a good one to work with. It's something that's balanced and using it otherwise.
I think anybody who tells you that you need to avoid certain foods, unless it's for like an actual proven food allergy, that's also probably
Yeah, that's a good point.
Popeyes?
Yeah. Keep that going.
Probably avoid most of the time.
Most of the time. But
Most
if
of the time,
somebody tells you like you're never allowed to have Popeyes ever in your life, that's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah.
But I like to have those meals after you do really well in a race. Then you go out and get something like crazy, and it feels good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I have a specific soda that I get after a race if I win only.
We went and got Five Guys and got like 4 pounds of French fries and huge hamburgers after Carson City. And that was a long day.
We destroyed it.
5 hours, probably 2 hours for you.
We destroyed that. We did well. So I want to talk a little bit about getting started on. So we recently talked about getting this question inspired a whole lot of follow-up questions on. I think you listened to it too, but it was us talking about how to get started in cycling and what we felt were like the least, or I should say the most friendly, most inviting, or best environments to learn in terms of the different genres of cycling. So really talking about like friendliness, accessibility, that sort of thing. So I want to know your thoughts on it, because you went from swimming, but you were familiar with competition because of that. And then you came over into cycling in the college realm, basically, but then you've also raced in the pro realm. So I'm sure that you've spoken to plenty of other athletes. Where do you feel is the best spot to start, and is it different perhaps for men and women?
I don't think it's that different, honestly. And one thing I want to say just off the bat is I think crits are actually the best way to learn the race. I really think that they're awesome.
Strong case for that.
They can be intimidating, but they provide this little microcosm of bike racing tactics, and it all happens really fast in a short amount of time. You can do, crits pretty often because they're not too taxing, and you can really learn a lot from them. So I think they're great.
You're basically sessioning a single portion of a course. The courses are so short.
Yeah.
In mountain biking, it's called sessioning usually. Like if you just repeat a certain section because you're working on it, that's the cool thing. It almost kind of gets rid of the variable of the course because you know it so well. So then you can focus on everything else.
Pivotal and selective moments of a race.
Yeah.
All happen within a criterium.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And you're learning cornering, you're learning, group riding etiquette. I mean, all of those things. So if you are just getting started in the sport, I would say find a group ride. And one of the things that I really wanted to hammer home is being competitive doesn't mean being unfriendly. And this
that's
is
a good point.
a really huge thing that I think a lot of women struggle with. And I struggled with it almost the whole time I was a swimmer, and it took me like well into my cycling career before I wrapped my head around it. And what I realized is in swimming, in any sport, when you're out training by yourself, there's only so hard that you can push yourself. Yeah. But when you've got somebody next to you, whether in the next lane or they're next to you on the group ride, you find levels that you didn't know you had.
Especially when you're new,
right.
I feel like,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So actually, that person next to you is doing you a massive favor, right? Like they're the one that's providing the impetus for you to find, a whole new level of depth that, you might not have known you had. So in that sense, your competitors are actually your allies.
Yeah.
And when you show up to a race, you are doing the same for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I know so many women and young girls, and I don't know if I think it's a lot different for guys. I think, there's a lot of negative social feedback for women to be competitive because it's like, a guy's competitive is like, oh, he's so ambitious and that's so great. And then a woman's competitive and it's like, she's really mean and she's not a nice person.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So,
total double standard. Yeah.
Right. And I think that affects women pretty deeply. I know it did me. And I hear from a lot of, especially young kids, like, but I don't want to beat my friends. I don't want to make them feel bad. And I think that's a total misunderstanding of what competition is. It's not about making someone else feel bad, because if you're out and you're competing against somebody, if they beat you, it's not that you don't necessarily have to feel bad. You might be disappointed, but the truth is you learn from that. The fact that they beat you just taught you something critical about what you need to know to become a better athlete.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot.
Versa.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as bike racers, so many people start the race. The odds are so low that you'll actually win. I feel like you have to understand that, because otherwise, you come from like the game of soccer, right? Where it's like 50-50 if you win, or like T-ball, right? When you're a kid in the United States, and it's 50-50 if you're going to win or not, maybe not 50-50, but there's two players, right? Yeah. And then in a bike race, there's so many people that you're going against. And then also with a bike race, certain people just simply will never win at a certain type of race, right? Yeah. While others will have an advantage. So if you don't find a way to learn from that experience, and if you don't put the halt on trying to take everything as such a painful loss, it's really discouraging. Yeah, I think Pete Moore said it on our YouTube channel, right? Like other measures of success, but there's that side of things where, especially as a bike racer, you should look at any time you go out and race, it's an opportunity to learn, and that's the main goal. Yep, exactly. Yeah, it does change things for sure. And
I think this is something you guys have talked about in getting into sport, that gravel races were maybe a good place to start. And I think that's a really interesting observation. And one of the things that I've seen happening is, especially lately, everybody's been saying road is dead, and everybody's doing gravel and cyclocross, and that's great. But I think road is getting an unnecessarily bad rap here. Agreed. And I think part of it is a lack of willingness to be vulnerable. And so when you go into a race, it's not that it's super fun to win, don't get me wrong. Right. But you don't, learn a lot from that necessarily. I mean, you are going to learn, but you always learn more from when you don't win the race. Totally. So looking at your competitors as allies, understanding that, showing up to the line and not holding back, even if you're racing against a really good friend, you're actually doing them a really great favor, because you're helping them learn more about themselves as athletes. But in the gravel events and the cyclocross events, when you're watching the race, you have no idea who's in what place, because everybody's all over the course and the gaps are huge and who knows what's going on. And so there's no sense of being in front of an audience and failing in front of an audience. Whereas if you're in a crit and you get dropped, it is painfully obvious.
You're off the front.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Can I add to that? That's really good. So that's a very good point. I feel like road is actually just becoming the poster child for traditional competition, perhaps, what people view. Mm-hmm. And gravel, in many respects, is the antithesis to traditional competition, in the sense that it's just like, go out and ride. Yeah. But every single one of you that has ridden a gravel race, all of us here, we know that it is just as competitive. Like when you're out there and you even see guys that are just like floating around back there, they're totally racing with their friends, everything else. But the strange thing is, I feel like, we've kind of like typecasted road into this role where it's only this lose or entirely fail. And when you fail, there's no gain from it.
Right.
But that's not the case.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be that way at all.
We were just talking about different types of riders yesterday here internally, and Pete and I were explaining it to some non-cyclists. We say there's one set of riders who will only race if they're at peak fitness, and they won't do any other races. And I saw in triathlon a lot of times where people will DNF. I think you see this too in other races. Yep. If they start to have a bad race or they got too hard, rather than getting a bad result, they DNF.
Yes.
Because that bad result is somehow tied to their self-worth.
Yes.
Totally.
Yes.
And then there's the type of people, like Pete's like this, he'll just race. He loves racing, races all the time. And then to your point, he learns so much and becomes such a better racer. So he has a better shot of having great results when he is super fit.
Yes.
But it's okay to get last place. And two, I think Pete recently, he did his job in some crit, and then I think he got second to last.
Yeah.
But he did, his North Power was like 410 for like an hour. So obviously like super fit, but he didn't care what place he got because he did his job for his team. And it's not about the result in the pack.
And if anything, that's a cool part about road racing.
Yeah.
And I think that like I really do like kind of racing alone when there are teams. It's fun, because you can kind of like be a maverick and float around and leverage off of other groups. But racing with a team is incredibly fun.
Oh my God, it's the best.
And it helps you learn so much. And it makes it changes the entire experience of racing. And it's really helpful for people. Yeah. I mean, you talked about like having a support network, and hopefully, you aren't changing teams every year. So then your support network changes. But, if you can have that sort of thing, then road racing entirely changes. You're seeing your friends there.
Yes.
You're all uplifting each other. And then on top of that, you can change things. Since you're not pro, that's the fun thing. Make the sprinter be the climber one day on a race and see how it works. Like, you can change things up, and it totally changes it. Road is getting an unfortunate and undeserved bad rap, for sure.
And I think part of it, I mean, honestly, I think social media feeds into this a little bit, because social media sends this message of outcome over process, because you're comparing your own behind the scenes to everybody else's highlight reel. Like nobody's taking pictures of their terrible days. And I mean, we joke about this all the time, but it sends a really insidious message especially about sport, that like, what's the point of doing a race if I don't win and I don't have a picture of me posting up to put on Instagram?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot. There's a lot of reasons to do that.
Yeah.
I was at a race. It was a local race in New Jersey a couple years ago. And I was in a break. We got off the front. We lapped the field. Well, there's a gal, I think, who ended up in no man's land. And afterwards, she was coming up and asking me and a couple of the other girls that were in the break about, well, what are the rules in that? How does it work? And she walked away, and one of the other girls just rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, she knows better." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She goes, "She's been racing for 5 years, but she wants the Evelyn Stevens story." And I was like, "What? I don't understand." She said, "Well, Evelyn Stevens, like overnight phenom, blah, blah, blah. The fact that Evelyn came out of that, that area, everybody wants the Evelyn Stevens story, which means that everybody feels like in order to make it, you have to be this overnight phenom. So nobody wants to even admit to how long they've been racing, how long they've been trying. They want to project an image of
I just picked it up. I was
being
good
a
at
rookie.
it.
Yeah, I just started, blah, blah, blah. And it's doing yourself such a disservice. I mean, and unfortunately, I think most of what we see as being overnight phenoms aren't actually. I mean, most of those people, even if they're coming into a new sport, like for me, I picked up cycling pretty quickly, but I had 12 years of developing a massive aerobic engine as a swimmer. Yeah. So it wasn't like, and we used to do spinning as dryland training at Stanford. So it wasn't like I was coming out of nowhere and just picked up a bike and just, but somebody on the outside looking in might see that.
And I'm sure you had a lot of hard days over in Europe.
So many hard days.
Yeah, exactly.
So many hard days. But I think this is a really important point. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to show up to the crit and totally get dropped. No one is judging you.
Yeah,
literally
totally.
Everyone there has had a bad day, and you can learn so much from that. And know that your competitors are your allies. Like, even if you are racing each other and not showing any mercy in the race, it doesn't mean that you can't go to them afterwards for a hug or reassurance or advice or whatever that may be. And if you're somebody who's just getting started in the sport and you show up to a road event and everybody looks really serious, I can tell you, I have a really serious resting face.
Yeah. That's a good way to call it.
It might be off-putting. That doesn't mean that if you came up to me and said hi and asked me questions, I wouldn't have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
Honestly.
A sweet analogy for that, I think, is in general fitness, people are afraid to go to the gym because, one, they think they don't look like everyone else, or two, this happens with guys, that they feel like they're not going to lift enough compared to everyone else. So somehow they have to lift before that. But like,
That's a great point, actually.
yeah, no one. So with cycling, when new people come out, I think cyclists are all happy that new person is out. Yeah. And at the gym, if there's someone who's just, for guys, there's this huge guy, everyone's like, they don't care how much weight you're lifting. They're like, totally. good on you, bro, for being here and working out. Yeah. And then if you go ask that experienced person for tips, like, unless they're in the middle of a set, like in the middle of squats, don't ask them. Yeah. But and generally they're like, hey, bro, like, could you help me? Like, I'm saying bro because that's the gym stuff. Usually, in general, they're like amazingly helpful,
approachable, and just an awesome information resource and happy to share what they've learned.
Yes.
I did this when I was younger, and this dude literally could squat 700 pounds, and he let me work out with him. Which was like awesome. So cool. And he taught me a whole bunch of stuff about weightlifting. But yeah, it's just an example. And he was the meanest looking guy in the whole gym, to your point too. Yeah. And he actually played Dungeons and Dragons.
Really?
Yeah. He was like 6'5", 300 pounds, and he played Dungeons and Dragons.
That's awesome.
How funny. Yeah, things you'd never guess.
Yeah.
We talk about Europe really quick?
Yes.
So this doesn't just happen on road. It happens on dirt too. But let's talk about road specifically. A lot of American riders, they do extremely well over here. Mm-hmm. And then they go over to Europe, and this was your experience. You full-time moved over to Europe, right? Yeah. They go over to Europe, and they just struggle. Mm-hmm. And they don't, and it's like, the performance isn't there from the athlete, and their numbers aren't there, even they back it up. It's not like, in some cases they go over, and they're just simply not fast enough. But in many cases, their numbers are great, but they just aren't able to, or their numbers just aren't where they need to be. And they are wondering why they can't execute. I assume you bumped up against that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Why does that happen? How'd you deal with it?
I think there are a lot of different factors. So there's factors on the bike and off the bike. And if you take away the off the bike stuff, which is significant, well, there's a couple ways of approaching this. One is you have American riders that go over for a race block and then come back. And then you also have American riders who go over, like I did, and move over there. I mean, I lived over there for 6 years, so like semi-permanently, and then try to race there full time. And both have their own sets of challenges. So if you're going over for a block, you're dealing with jet lag, you're dealing with, just the transatlantic flight and all of that stuff. And that's really hard on the body, but there's more to it than that. I mean, one of the big things is cognitive load, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. When you're learning to read, first you have to learn to identify letters, and then you have to learn to identify combinations of letters that make particular sounds, and then combinations of letters that make words, et cetera, et cetera. Well, by the time you actually learn how to read, you're not looking at each individual letter of each word. You're recognizing bigger patterns. I mean, to the point where you're not even reading across an entire line. If you're doing retinal tracking or whatever, you're just like glancing at certain parts of the paper and you're recognizing these bigger spatial patterns. Mm-hmm. Same thing happens in bike racing. So when you first get started, you're thinking about everything. You're thinking about, like, should I have my hands on the hoods or in the drops, and you're looking at the wheel in front of you, and then you're trying to look at everybody around you, and you're trying to assess the course and the terrain and the cornering and everything. It's way too much stimuli that's incoming for you to process. But over time, you learn to understand what you don't actually have to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. There's a lot you don't actually have to pay attention to.
Totally.
And I like to joke that the difference between amateurs and experts is the experts know how much they don't actually have to pay attention to.
Yeah. A really good example of this actually is when you first start riding behind somebody in a group. You're looking at their tire. Yes. And then you're like looking at, and then you're like, maybe I should look at their brakes. And then you're wondering what you should look at, to try to like not hit them or stay within range. And then there comes a point where you just look over their shoulders and you're just looking up and you're looking at the road and you're able to just subconsciously pick up on what's going to happen just by, looking up the road. It's really tricky to you'd think that you have to look at the gap between your tires, but really you don't.
Right.
And in fact, it actually makes it worse, right? So like if you look further down the road, it's got to be tough though on top of that with like you said, the different language. So all the signs are different.
Yes.
Traffic works differently.
Yes.
Roads are going to be more narrow. Turns may be tighter.
Yep.
They may not repair their streets in the same way that you're used to. Anything, and then also on top of that, the riders probably ride differently too,
Yes.
right?
And so the thing is an American rider, you're learning these patterns,
Yeah.
and you're learning pattern recognition in the States, and then you go to Europe, and it's all different.
Yeah.
So all of that pattern recognition and all that cognitive economy that you've developed is gone.
Yeah.
And you're back at square one with all the stimuli, and you're processing everything. You're trying to figure out, okay, what are the things I don't have to pay attention to? And it's not necessarily a conscious process. It takes time to learn those different patterns and learn the pattern recognition there. So I think that's a vote in favor of like being over there for a longer period of time. And even then, it's like the difference between the U.S. and America, or I'm sorry, the U.S. and Europe. But then you also have the differences like racing in the Netherlands is so much different than racing in Italy. It's
How's
so
it
much
different?
So,
I mean, they're big people in the Netherlands. Italy, they're small people.
Right,
But yeah, how's it different?
I think it all stems, it stems in part from culture and in part from terrain. So, for example, in the Netherlands, it's really, really flat. There's not a ton of climbing. But the roads are really narrow. And so most of the selections in the races have to do with positioning on really tiny roads and crosswinds.
Yeah.
And that requires a great deal of aggression and skill in positioning and tactics as far as knowing how to echelon and all of those things. So the Dutch riders are really good at being very aggressive with positioning.
Yeah.
Whereas you get to Italy and the terrain is a lot more varied. There's more emphasis on mountains and climbing, and the dynamic in the peloton is different. And then you go from there to France, and then it's, France, I feel like, is more similar to the States as far as like pattern recognition and peloton dynamics.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time to get a feel for all of this. And again, going back to your brain uses more glucose than any organ in your body, you're having to think a lot more, process a lot more information than everybody else around you. And that's physically taking a toll, even though it's a mental, cognitive process.
Mm-hmm.
So power numbers drop. And then you add to that, going back again to, hey, your whole person and your whole life actually affects your performance on the bike. If you're living in Europe, chances are you're away from your own support network. You're feeling isolated because you maybe don't speak the language as well, or you're having to learn the language, and that is shockingly isolating.
Yeah.
It is so hard.
Yeah.
And even if you can speak the language, you might not speak it well enough to project your personality to your teammates. And that's really isolating. Like that was the hardest thing for me, was not to be able to crack jokes with people.
Yeah.
It's really hard and it's depressing.
Yeah.
So that takes a toll. And then let's say you've moved over there, and this was a hard one for us, like figuring out how to pay your bills, figuring out how to read the bills, figuring out how to read labels in the grocery store. I mean, all of these things are extra stressors that you don't have to deal with when you are here in the States. And so there's a huge, and again, like you have to take into account all of those stresses when you're looking at your training and your recovery and your performance.
That's why, in one product plug, really quick, that's one of the
Which
main
product?
Trainer Road.
Okay.
Yeah. We can do it. Yeah. That's why we've kept the interface so simple.
So I'm going to say this. So
Yeah.
Matt Fitzgerald, too, he referenced in How Bad Do You Want It, a bunch of studies, and they've studied this a lot, where people do like math problems and then work out, and the RPE is crazy. Like this, it's the same athlete, and suddenly they can't perform as well.
The rate of perceived exertion goes way up.
Yep.
Right.
Try having a conversation or even like doing math while you're working out hard. It's near impossible. So our interface relative to
Others,
I'm going to call them competitors. We're very simple, and that's not because we can't do something like flashy.
Yeah, exactly.
That is by design. Chad, when you do workout text, like I just did, who was it, Bluebell or Taylor? You're not doing text during the interval. It's during the rest period.
Typically, and then as the intervals carry on and you get to that third and fourth set where
There's
you're just
less.
fading, there's very little bits of information.
Yes.
Yeah, intentionally so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's what you can do is try a hard workout and put on Downton Abbey and try to watch that while you're working out.
Or a
and
lecture.
Put it
And
on
pay
something
attention
with
to it.
subtitles.
Yeah.
That's a huge
That's really
challenge.
hard. People say
Yeah.
like reading a book or listening to an audiobook, extremely hard.
Yeah.
Now try then during that same workout, switch to music, but go even further, switch to music that you know. So there's like I have a playlist that I do, and it's probably like the same 30 songs. You know, on Spotify, a random workout list.
Yeah.
Even that, listening to a brand new song.
bit challenging.
But if you already know the song, to your point, Amber, that you hear over and over again, do that. Turn off all of the visual distractions. I even like making the room dark.
Yeah.
And just focus on your power number.
Yeah.
The RPE goes down so much.
Yeah.
You don't need volcanoes and stuff like that. That just adds to cognitive load and limits your performance. We've talked about this. We're doing some updates, but I want down the line to have a version 2 where the app only shows your power, your target power, and the remaining time in the interval.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, people's Garmin's, sometimes they overload them way too much with too information.
Yes.
You have a ton of data feeds.
Yes.
At Leadville, I just did like 3 fields that I could see at once.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's plenty. You don't need left-right balance and what's my TSS for this. Like that's all afterwards. And other apps do this too. They're like, we want to tell you everything. Like right now you're in a VO2 max interval. You don't need to know that in the VO2 max interval.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
You're doing it.
Yeah, you're doing it.
We
You just
got
need
it.
to know
I
what
can
your
pretty much feel this.
Yeah, exactly.
You just need to know what your power target is and get through that. We don't need to encode all this other information into the display. Simple is better. And people think that simple is somehow like you're not capable, but it's not that.
No.
It's by design.
That's why I'd argue one by drivetrains on the mountain bike side of things, I bet have made people
Things like
faster
that,
beyond that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because shifting, when you're thinking about, that shifter's different on one
What
side.
ring am I in?
It becomes
Which shifter do I need to use now?
Yeah, it
Which way does
becomes
this shifter turn?
right, exactly. Like you start to get to the point where sure, like you get it, you understand it, but when you're putting out a high amount of power and you're at capacity, those simple things, even though you may not misunderstand it, you contemplating that and making that move is energy.
It's just another
cost.
resource suck. You
Yep.
just got to dedicate your resources to particular aims. You don't want to dilute them with all these other foci.
I have one more point to say, and then you have a great story about this, is that there's times to train your physiology to the max, right?
Yes.
And then there's time to do cognitive load.
Yeah.
And I think, and there's time for both, but I don't think that there's always time to do, like, you don't, what do you call it, Chad? You had a good word for this, but always doing like 50-50. So you have some cognitive load and like you're training cognitive load a little bit and you're training physiology a little bit means I don't think you can't maximize either one at once.
Yep.
Amber, you had a VO2 max story you told us.
Yes. Yeah. So this was really interesting for me. My coach and I a few seasons ago decided that, one of my limiters that I really needed to focus on was VO2 max power. So like absolute power, not even thinking about, watts per kg. So he was giving me these really challenging VO2 max workouts. And, I was doing pretty well, and we were kind of bumping up the power target. And at one point I hit this power target where I just couldn't. And I was training outdoors, and I was just struggling, and I'd not be quite making it, and then it gets in my head, and then mental downward spiral, and then next thing you know, like the whole interval set sucks, and just going home feeling tail between your legs. And I really started thinking about this, and I was like, okay, I know on some level this is to do with belief and confidence, like because I'm not sure I can do this, and I know my coach wouldn't give me something he doesn't think I can do, but in my head I was stuck that I wasn't sure I could do it, and that was affecting me. And so then I had this idea that, okay, when I'm outside, there's a lot of other stimuli. I have to pay attention to traffic. I'm having to stare at my, computer for my power numbers. But there's also, I'm actually having to focus on bringing the power level up and then holding it there. So you're willing yourself to get the power level up and then holding it there. And that in of itself, that mental focus and effort is taxing. And so I thought, what if I just took away one of those factors or two? So take away the traffic and the other stimuli. So I'm on the trainer. And then what if I take away that cognitive load of having to like will myself to get up to power, and I just let the trainer do that for me? So I programmed this into Trainer Road. And
What app was that? Okay.
Checks in the mail.
It was
Checks
great.
in the mail. It's pretty good.
It's my favorite.
We're done here, guys. We're all set. Yeah, just joking.
So I just went in the basement. Same thing, like no music, no nothing, just fan in the app. And I didn't have to look at the power meter even. And it was just, all I knew was I had to keep my cadence through the end of the interval. And that was all I had to do. And I did it.
Yeah.
It removed just a few little layers of minor cognitive load, which made all the difference. And the second that I did it, I knew I was physically capable of doing it. It totally shifted the belief structure, and then I was able to do it. And I ended up using that tactic a couple times as we were kind of bumping up the power
To level up. So you did it indoor, and then you could do the same power outdoor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it honestly, call it mental weakness if you want to. I don't care. I'm a human being.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
you need that
Everybody.
confidence to be able to do it. You know,
It's mental conditioning.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's really hard.
When you were racing, we didn't cover this, and then I have a question for you. But what was your FTP and what was your WAP per kg? Like when you were winning races?
To be honest with you, I don't really know. My FTP varied wildly. Like I remember I did a lactate test coming back off from some gnarly injury, and it was like 200 watts, which was really depressing. But I know that my VO2, so my VO2 power output would be upwards of like 370, 380 watts. And then FTP would vary, usually in the off season, like 260-ish, and then I would try to bump it up to 300-ish if I could.
Oh,
so
Jonathan, there's going back to cognitive load. Nino Schurter, who best mountain biker in the world.
Yeah.
Right. He, I don't know if he would post stuff on social media about cognitive training. I don't know if it's real or not, but can you describe that?
Yeah, he posts a lot of things about you'll see a lot of them. They'll sit there and they'll actually stand on like a Bosu ball, right?
Oh yeah.
And they'll have like a lacrosse ball that they're bouncing against a wall from hand to hand. So like a very hand-eye coordination, and then a guy will be yelling at him like math problems. So he'll be doing it, and then it'll be like 2 + 2, and he's like 4, and he's like going through the whole thing. But it's interesting because when you think about it, man, like the chess game that we were talking about, like crit racing, I find that after a crit, even though it's, an hour, 90 minutes long, I am mentally so spent, so spent, because you kind of, in a race scenario like that, you put your brain into like primal fight and flight sort of stuff too. It's pretty like intense. So you make the stakes higher than they are in your mind, and then you're dealing with so many variables. Yeah, it's super exhausting. So there is a total, I think, case to be made for that, because in the race scenario, and it's doing both sides of it, like you said. If it's affecting your ability to hit the numbers you need to bring about the physiological adaptations you're going for, then distill things and focus it so that you can get in the quality work. And then if there are opportunities where you feel like, man, in this racing scenario, I just feel like I'm like my brain isn't working fast enough, or I feel like I'm not, then maybe try to introduce that in some respect, at a small level, and try to train yourself on it. It's all training.
In mountain biking, I found the same thing as I lose. It's mentally exhausting.
Yeah.
And you hear stories all the time about roadies who just can't put power out on dirt.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, to your point, Amber, it's totally different.
It totally is.
And you need to spend a good amount of time on the dirt until you get used to it, the pattern recognition.
Yep.
And then you get like Jonathan, and it is like second nature, right? To you.
Yeah. Like a good example of this is so many people, Park City Point to Point is a 75-mile mountain bike racing Park City. It's got a lot of climbing in it. I think it's somewhere around 12,000 feet. But Leadville is a 100-mile race. I think that it has somewhere around 11,000, 10,000 feet of climbing. But everybody that I've talked to that's done both of those races say that Park City is so much harder. And the reason is because it's almost entirely single track. I think they always brag about it being like 0.2% not single track, basically. And it's funny, but it's not really technical single track. Anybody that's ridden Park City knows that it's pretty flowy and smooth. Yeah. But when you're riding on single track, you do so much more mental calculation and adjustment and everything else. And by the time 75 miles goes by, you feel like you've done a whole lot more than just that. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I feel like you said, if you commit to living over in Europe, like seeing these races, or for all of us average Joes, something that's more applicable, if you get familiar with the environment that is your A race, that sort of a thing, then I feel like it only betters your chances. Yeah. Anything you can do to familiarize. If you're doing Kona, just spend the whole year in Kona.
So did it make it easier after you've lived there for a while?
Yes.
And
100%.
You speak a few languages, right?
Mm-hmm. I learned German. So I lived in Austria, and it was really awkward because when you take language classes, they teach you High German, but the Austrians actually speak a dialect. That took me a little while to figure out. And then I was on an Italian team, and that was a very steep learning curve too, is learning to speak Italian. And so after a while, it really did help, like feeling familiar with the grocery stores and being able to read labels and being able to joke around with your teammates. And it really helped me between races to go to a home that was my home. It wasn't a hotel or a team house or something like that. That made a really, really big difference. So that familiarity is really important. And there's lots of applications for this as far as performance and racing goes. Because again, it's all on the bike and off the bike. So night before a race, pack everything. Have checklists that you reuse so that you're not having to think and second guess, did I get everything? So that on race day, know exactly what you're going to eat for breakfast, know exactly when. Like I would set a series of like 12 alarms. So like before a TT, it would be like, eat breakfast at this time. Then I have an alarm for, take a shot of beet juice, and then an alarm for, slam a Red Bull, like, whatever it was. But it took all the thinking out for me. I didn't have to keep track of stuff. Like you outsource that to your cell phone, to, whoever's there supporting you at the race. And then bring that cognitive load down as far as possible.
That's huge.
I want to cover 2 more topics here, and then we'll take some questions. So if you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube, which you can do, by the way, almost every week, Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, the 2 questions I want to cover. Number 1, I want to talk about crashing, because crashing is part and parcel of bike racing, but especially in the pro peloton, because you spend so much more time in a race environment, right? Just more time means more exposure, means, the odds are just going to tick you off every once in a while. So, how do you psychologically recover from that? We get a lot of people that have crashed. They send in questions and they say my power's getting back there, but anytime I get out on the road or anytime I get into a race or something else like that, I'll kind of lock up.
Yep.
So has there been anything that you've found to help because I'm sure you've had plenty of crashes, to psychologically recover from those crashes that you have?
Yeah. So there's a couple components of this. One is just the physical recovery afterwards. Is if you crash, chances are you got some kind of an injury, whether it's just minor road rash or whatever it is. It's not just about the physical recovery. There's a real emotional component to that too. So you need to be really aware of that. And I wanted to throw there's a really good resource called Injured Athletes Toolbox, and it's a gal by the name of Heidi, and she's run into a bunch of different kinds of injuries, and she's actually built an injury recovery business out of this.
Cool.
So her website alone is super, super helpful just to read through it. But it addresses that emotional component of healing, like, the loss of identity when you can't ride your bike for a while and all of that. So I think that's really important. When you're back on the bike, the crux is to rewire your limbic system. And what I mean by that is, like, tiny baby reaches out and grabs red hot, iron. Prior to doing that, they don't know that that's something dangerous to do. But the second that they do that, the limbic system, your autonomic nervous system, records all of the stimuli associated with that event for future reference. It's a survival mechanism. So the next time you see something red hot, you're not going to reach out and grab it. Your limbic system is going to go red alert, danger, don't touch that, we could die. Same thing happens on a bike. So if you crash, all of the stimuli that were incoming at that moment, your limbic system records unconsciously. And you have no control over this. This is just your system trying to keep you alive. So it's a good thing, actually. The problem is that when you get back on the bike, your limbic system is recognizing all of those stimuli as, oh my God, we're going to die.
Yeah, totally.
So it is setting off red alert, and the red alert is what makes you do all of the things that are going to make you more likely to crash. So when you're cornering and descending on a bike, for example, you want to be supple, you want to be looking up at where you want to go, not at the ground. But the second that your limbic system kicks in and it starts flooding you with anxiety about the fact that you're in a really dangerous situation, you're going to tense up. So you're not going to be supple anymore. You're probably going to be more likely to stare at the ground because you're nervous about looking up. And all of those things are going to serve to make you more likely to crash. So what do you do about that? Well, if you get back on your bike and hundreds of thousands of times you go through the same corner where you crashed, and you do that safely hundreds of thousands of times, your limbic system's eventually going to go, what? Oh, actually, we're okay again.
Never mind. Yeah,
all right.
Not that intense.
So maybe not hundreds of thousands of times, but the point is that you need to go bring those same stimuli back into your limbic system and do so and with the message that this is actually safe.
Start associating different outcomes with them.
Yeah, if I could add to that too, doing so under a lower arousal level, because in many cases, like Lee McCormick, when we worked with him, there's a full video on this on how to become a better mountain biker, and we didn't cover this quite as much, but you can actually listen to the podcast that we did with him too, and he talked about it. Your lizard brain is how he talks about it.
Same thing, exactly.
Yeah, and he was talking, and we actually had a situation, Nate, where you got to a point where you had crashed and you were over your limits, and you felt like it was like, this is too much. Like your arousal level was too high, right? And so Lee spent a lot of time trying to focus on reducing your arousal level so then they could rewire things. In other words, if you crashed in a race scenario on a turn, it doesn't mean that you have to go back in the race scenario it means go back at another point, or you know, if you can't go back to that specific turn, just go through turns and take it at your own pace, and then kind of build up, right?
And a mantra really helps with this. So there's a couple of things at work here. So one is your limbic system is going to recognize the situation, and it's going to mentally create anxiety around the situation, and the anxiety is going to elicit a physical response. But you can also go the other direction. So that's the efferent, and you can also have the afferent. So if your body is relaxed, the physical sensation of being relaxed is going to send a message to your brain that, hey, whatever is going on out here is actually safe and chill and we're fine. It's hard to do when the anxiety is making you want to tense up.
Right.
But you can do things like watch bike racing on your computer, listening to a song that really relaxes you to start associating some of those stimuli. But when you're on the bike, using a mantra can be really great because you're circumventing some of that wiring, because you can only hold one thought in your mind at a time. So if you pick a mantra, and one that I really like is, I'll just say, chin up, arms relaxed, chin up, arms relaxed, chin up, arms relaxed. And what that does is it reminds me to keep my chin up and look forward to where I want to go, not at the ground. And then arms relaxed reminds me to take the tension out of my arms and be supple. And then those thoughts repeated over and over in my head crowd out all of the negative imagery of crashing, going over guardrail, you know, like whatever it is. And you get through that descent or that ride or whatever it was, and your limbic system's like, oh, we just did that and we're still alive. And then you do that again, and you do that again, and you do that again. But I think the mantra can really help accelerate the process of rewiring, because you're preventing that anxiety from filling your brain with negative imagery. So you're circumventing that. And then if the mantra is something that helps you relax physically, you're, you know, activating that afferent feedback that, like, I'm relaxed, things are chill, we're fine, you know, it's safe out here, it's good.
I have different mantras for different sort of racing too. Like strong and I know this sounds really weird, but strong and water is what I think of when I'm doing enduro racing.
Strong in water?
Yeah.
I think don't die. Don't die.
But yeah, and then like with XC stuff, it's all focused on just breathing and breathing and breathing. And I have, you know, specific things that I'll trigger for that. But it'll change in different environments, I assume too, right? Like you could, you know, that tool is flexible. In other words, you can use it for a lot of things.
So there's another topic I want to talk about that doesn't get discussed very often at all. I think Stacey Sims is one of the only people that I've heard of talk about it, is women's menstrual cycle and how that affects training.
It's huge.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this is something that's really important for, you know, all female athletes. And, you know, I just want to say to anybody out there, you know, this is something that you really need to think about, be aware of, and, you know, be able and willing to communicate this to your coach, because it's a huge part of our physiology. And so, you know, during a monthly cycle, there's kind of, you know, 2 weeks of high hormone and then a week of low hormone, and everybody gets affected differently by this. And, you know, going back to, you're a whole person, everything in your life is going to affect your performance. It's a huge part of that. So for me, it took a long time to wrap my head around this, because it actually took a long time for me to even think about the fact that this might be affecting my training, because it's not something people talk about.
Yeah.
And even as a woman who's been dealing with this forever, like, it's not, you know, I always thought like, oh, whatever, I just train and that's it. But over time, I realized that actually, like, the day before my cycle would start, I just have terrible legs. And, you know, with my coach, if we were doing a training block, I could just say like, hey, you've got me doing VO2 intervals on that day, you know, that is not going to go well. And he'd, you know, oh, of course, like, we'll move it back 2 or 3 days. And then I would get that workout and do high quality, instead of trying to go smash it out on the day, feel like crap, have a poor performance that gets stuck in my head, that starts to erode my confidence, and maybe affects the next 3 or 4 days of training.
So for athletes that don't have a coach, because that's probably the vast majority of people, if they do have a VO2 max workout scheduled, how would do you say 3 days is enough? Or how do you, first, we talked about this before, but maybe women on the pill, it's pretty regular, and you know when your cycle's going to start.
Right.
But if you're not, how do you know? I have known nothing about this. How do you? Because I really want to build this into the product.
Yeah.
But how could we predict this, or is it surveys, or like, what do we do?
Surveys are really important, and I think that this is, you know, everyone is different. So it's trial and error. So what it would take is just recording some data over, a few months. And the longer, the bigger the data set you have, the more you're going to be able to pick up on patterns like this. And even for a woman who's on the pill, who's having, very regular cycles and that she knows exactly how many days, surveying like even day in and day out, how's my mood? How's my energy level? Was I able to focus today? How did my legs feel? Do I feel recovered from yesterday's workout? Because it's going to affect your ability to recover well. And figuring out, how your cycle affects your own training is super, super important. But the problem is like, I can't say, everyone's going to be the same that I was. Like for me, it was the day before and I had like a 24-hour period. And that's probably pretty lucky because some women might have a few days. And for me, it was like, if we could just postpone 24 to 48 hours, I'd be good. But it took a long time to figure that out. So I think recording, just making notes, whether it's in an app or in just like a regular notebook. Go old school and analog.
So might someone would you do an aerobic ride that day or would you take the day off?
It depended, but an aerobic ride would be fine. And the other thing that really helped was just knowing.
Yeah.
Knowing
that your performance is going to be lower.
Because otherwise it's very easy for everybody, to question what's going on, what's causing this.
Oh my God, my taper's off or whatever. Like I would just go into that ride knowing like I'm probably going to feel terrible. And you know what? It's fine because 24 hours later, I'll be good.
So I like the idea with us, Chad, of just if you know that it's coming up, just skip that workout.
Just bump it,
Not even bump it because then it could be really hard then to bump the rest of your training plan. Yeah. If you lose one Tuesday workout, Thursday's still going to be hard. 2 days from now, I would just skip it.
Yeah, it depends how much reshuffling you're willing to do.
Yeah.
How good a handling you feel you have on your
and with your race day and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
At some point we want to have Stacy Sims on the podcast. I'm sure she'll be able to speak a lot on it. Chad, you were just at you got to see one of her keynotes.
Yeah, I've emailed back and forth with her. It's just a question of us aligning, when she's here and making it fit.
I've got ideas to bring into the product. It's hard to it's not easy, straightforward to be like cycle starts, easy day,
right?
Totally.
Then go. Because if it was, that would be easy. But then there's some other things we want to do, and this fits in really well. And I don't know. So if anyone has other Dr. Stacey Sims, I really want to talk to her like off camera and kind of figure out how to do this well. But if anyone else does have great scientific ideas or anecdotes too,
please share them with us.
Either on the forum post
how you end up adjusting your training around this would be great.
Or Nate@trainer.com. That'd be great too. I have one more other question.
Sure.
Woman-specific saddles and equipment.
Yes.
You had a great story about that, but I also want to know for if there's brands that you like. I know it's very saddles are specific to certain people, but I think in general, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you might know for other pros that you've talked to, certain brands or types of saddles that work better for women versus. Because we talk so much about men's saddles and
right, totally.
I think the bottom line is just to know that you don't have to sit in sheer discomfort,
believe it or not,
misery.
Even on the TT bike, because that's always been.
TT bikes, if you can get to uncomfortable, you're probably doing really well.
Talk about cognitive load, though. The people who have very comfortable saddles on TT, I envy them because it's
huge.
Yeah, they're probably gaining 10 watts.
Yeah, your body is just screaming at you because of the discomfort otherwise.
Yeah, and then discomfort is a distraction that adds the load for sure. The interesting thing about this that I've found is a lot of men actually like women-specific saddles too, and then they feel self-conscious about buying them and don't, even if it's a better saddle for them.
I can see that.
And I
can see that.
I think
for sure.
The industry is kind of shifting away from that a little bit, which is good. And I think that a good starting place, if you're a woman out there and you're really uncomfortable, it can be really hard to go in your bike shop and talk to the dudes in there about the specific kind of chafing that you're experiencing. But I think a good place to start is with a saddle that has a cutout. That's generally speaking more comfortable for women. But again, it really depends on the individual. And I know some women who just like the Arione flat saddle. I can't sit on that.
I still don't know how. That's a fence post. That's all that is. I still don't know how people sit on.
Best saddle in the world.
Yeah,
all right.
It's crazy. It's so individual. but I think it's just so important to go try a bunch of different saddles, and more saddle companies are offering demo fleets where you can go in and you can try different shapes and see what works. And honestly, like, give it a nice long ride. I mean, because sometimes those pressure points aren't going to make themselves known until you've done a few, maybe 2-3 hour rides on them.
Yeah.
And
or the saddle breaks in. I've had that before where I get a saddle and it's awesome. And like I test it, right? And then I get it, and after like 3 weeks, it starts to flex more and it starts to break in, and then it goes away.
Yeah. And honestly, like, don't be afraid to talk to other people about this, because this is literally, everyone has this issue. And I know you guys have talked about this before. It's not something, to be, ashamed or, like,
everyone
has this problem.
Yep.
So I was on a team when we were sponsored by a particular saddle company that, like, it did not work. Like, I could sit on the tops and kind of in the drops, but I could not TT on the saddle. And basically the compromise was that I just never rode my TT bike for an entire season because I wasn't allowed to use a different saddle on the TT bike. But I mean, I just physically, it was impossible. And especially given that most of our TTs would come mid-stage race. I mean, it was ridiculous to expect that I would do a TT one day, feel completely destroyed, and then get back on the saddle and try to do, 150K stage the next day. It's just not realistic. Yeah. So that was a big bummer. And I think I actually had the opportunity to talk to the guy who invented the Adamo.
Yeah.
The ISM Adamo at Eurobike a few years ago. And we got in this huge conversation about, because I was like, thank you for not making this about sit bones, because it's never the sit bones that are the problem, especially for women. And he just laughed, and we were talking about it. And he was saying that, he'd been working with a lot of men and male pro cyclists. And he said there were a lot of young guys. I mean, they actually had blood in their urine. And I mean, that's a serious health concern.
Yeah.
And the teams would not let them change saddles.
Yeah. I feel like saddle manufacturers and shoe manufacturers have it pretty tough because they make a very individual product. But if you're sponsoring a team, it's like your worst nightmare if you're paying money for them to use something and then somebody doesn't use it. But that's why I really like teams that don't have saddle sponsors, don't have shoe sponsors, and they kind of like run what you brung on that side for specific things like that are so individual.
Yeah. And some companies are better than others about soliciting feedback and saying, and working with you. Like, if they don't have a model of saddle that works for you, that's an amazing opportunity for that company to come up with a new model that's going to serve another group of people. So I think, some companies are more willing to do that than others.
Yeah.
But.
So what's your, and this is individual, but what's your road saddle and what's your TT saddle?
I really like the ISM Adamo for both.
Yeah.
And now there's a few Adamos, right?
There's
There's a Adamo Race and there's a Adamo. Do you know which one you have?
The PN3.
So
PN3.
Yeah.
I've seen more and more people using Adamos on the road. Or similar type of saddles too.
Yeah, it really got popular with triathletes originally.
Big time.
Like, as everything. Triathletes do
They're
everything.
trendsetters.
Yep, and it looks like a funny saddle.
Admit it,
it looks like a funny saddle, and people didn't. That's a triathlete saddle.
Soon enough, we won't have socks. All of us roadies.
Yeah.
They're just leading.
That goes in cycles. That goes in cycles, let me tell you.
I'm totally joking. Well, thank you, Amber. This has been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to take some live questions now from people that have submitted them. We'll look on YouTube here. Nate, do you have Facebook?
I do.
Cool. Okay. We'll divide and conquer. This has been super helpful.
People love Amber.
Oh, thanks,
Sweet.
guys.
Awesome. I'm pulling it up on the YouTube side. Do you have one there, Nate?
I'm still reading. Sorry, everyone. Chad, entertain.
Actually, two things that happened that we're not going to talk about this week. We'll talk about next week.
Let's talk about the things we're not going to talk about.
Yeah, let's do that.
Real quick.
First thing is that Chad and I, the backcountry skiing thing, we have a bunch of takeaways in terms of training, and that was the most amazing week I think both of us have ever had.
We're just going to
Powder Creek Lodge. It was amazing. And then Nate won a bike race, but we're not going to talk about it this week.
In the expert division.
Yeah, in
my age group.
Mountain biking. Hey, quit selling yourself short. It's awesome. So anyways,
Own it.
That's next week. So we'll talk about that. Mike says, I have a cold at the moment. When can I return to training? I figure we can probably share some anecdotes. If there's anything that doesn't overlap, feel free to chime in on everybody. For me, I honestly, I've found that if if I don't respect the cold, then the cold ends up just lasting longer. And I found that the best thing for me to do is when I feel like I am sick, I just don't train for a day or two. And then thereafter, I find that I'm able to get on top of the ball once again. I know a lot of people say, like, if it's above the something or below the something.
Above the neck.
Yeah, that's it. Then, like, you're fine to do it. And sure. But for me, I've just found that for me personally, it's better when I just respect it and I take the day or two off. Pays off for me. I don't know if anybody else has anything different.
Yeah. I feel like we've covered this enough times. I just want to defer to Amber.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I think you always, if early on in my career, I learned this lesson the hard way that sometimes taking 1 or 2 days off can save you 10 to 14 down the road. And a big part of performance and success in cycling or any sport is not getting sick or injured at key times.
Yeah.
So really looking after your immune system is really, really important.
What do? I need to know.
As far as like when you get sick?
No, looking after your immune system.
Oh, there's tons of things you can. Actually, you want to hear a funny little trick?
I do. Okay. Oh, yes. One weird trick.
One weird trick.
Let's write this article right now.
Wear earplugs on airplanes.
Oh.
Why is that?
So everybody gets sick on airplanes, and people think it's because you're touching stuff, and there's ventilation, all that. A huge component of it is the engine noise. The engine noise elicits a low-level fight or flight response, and even though cognitively it becomes white noise, it is still causing you to secrete elevated levels of cortisol the entire time you're on the flight.
Yeah.
So if you wear earplugs, cortisol levels come down, you preserve some immune system stress, and
I wear noise-canceling headphones the whole time, even if I'm not listening.
Always.
Yeah.
Just because it tells
By the way, so
it's overwhelming.
the Bose QC15
QC
over the
35s.
35, sorry. 35s. We buy them for all of our employees in open areas. Actually, I think all of our employees at
everyone's
Trainer
one.
Yeah, just because you can't get in flow. It's like you can't, at work, you can't concentrate. So people are saying things. Also, if you're in a Boeing, there's like the Boeing 787, which is the Dreamliner. That is much quieter than the old 747s or 777s. Yeah, and that's also like, they talk about it, you being more rested as you get off the flight, and that was their goal from Boeing because of that load, and that's so interesting. As soon as I get on there before the engine start, I'm gonna put my headphones on.
Yep.
Because I guess you would get the same outcome from noise canceling headphones too.
Sure. Yeah. If I'm traveling alone, not with you guys, we often travel all three of us together. I have headphones on as soon as I enter the airport.
Chad does with us.
Yeah, Chad does anyway. Chad does
Jonathan
anyway.
and I talk. Chad doesn't want to talk to us.
True.
Look at us.
The least of all of us.
Yeah. We've talked about
there we go. Good point.
even getting Chad a different house.
Yeah, when we go places.
It can only take
Chad
so
gets
much
his
of
own
Jonathan and I.
Drop that
We get
cognitive load
annoying.
way down.
That's funny.
I do want to say just one follow-up on that is I think it's really important when you're sick to learn to listen to your body. And we talk a lot about different metrics, TSS, and we have all these kind of devices that are going to measure heart rate and power output and all this stuff. I really encourage everyone listening, use those things to help you calibrate your body awareness.
Yeah.
Don't use them to replace your body awareness because
totally
learning to tune into your body is really important. And, HRV is a great metric I got into several years ago. It helped me kind of like alleviate guilt over taking time off when I thought, when I wasn't feeling good. But it's not a substitute for knowing your body. And you really got to tune into that. So, when you're sick, if you're not sure when to return back, if you're really not sure, take an extra day off until you're like, chomping at the bit. And then, okay, maybe you need one more day and then you go back.
Yes.
Tyson has a question.
Yeah.
Where do you see women's racing going, and how do you suggest increasing numbers at local races? I have 2 daughters, and they both like to ride, but the local fields sometimes have a total of 4 racers across all categories in the ladies' field. Not much fun for a young girl. Any suggestions on how to increase these girls in their stage and showing up?
Okay, so there are 2 things. Representation matters. So, the more women that can come out and show up for these races, it's really important. And if you've got daughters that are interested in racing, even if there's only 4 women in the field, 2 more in there, you've got 6, and then so on and so on. And I think that's really important. And I think that I think for a lot of women, it goes back to women are more comfortable with the cyclocross courses and the gravel courses where you don't have that element of vulnerability where you're risking, a sense of failure in front of an audience. And I think that if we can really start to reframe how we look at that and how we define a successful race, we're going to see more and more people coming out for these types of events because they're so much fun. It's so much fun. And an important part of that, talking to your girls about, hey, when you go to a race, it's a learning process. And oftentimes for a lot of training races I used to do, I would set what we called process goals. So I wouldn't necessarily be racing for a result, especially if it was on a course that didn't necessarily suit me. If I was on a team, I always had a job to do. But if I was racing by myself, you can set process goals. Like, today I'm really going to work on my positioning. And I'm not going to go for the intermediate sprints, but I'm going to be in position for every single one. Or, I'm going to be in position. I'm not going to go for the sprint, but then I'll counter. So I have to be in position in order to counter. And you make little, like, intermediate goals like that have nothing to do with the final result.
Totally.
But you're going to learn so much from that, and you're going to cultivate these skills. So I just think, I think there's a lack of a willingness to be vulnerable now. It's okay to not win a bike race. Like, it doesn't have to make you feel bad about yourself. The whole point of what we're doing here is to get better as athletes. And that's where your competitors are your allies. That's where the races are going to be the crucible and the training ground where you're going to learn the most. I mean, you're going to learn so much more from that than going out and doing a solo training ride. So, show up. I mean, if you have the power and women, encourage them to come out and, talk to people at the races, cultivate a sense of community there. Roadies get a bad rap for being elitist, and unfortunately a lot of them are. If you're new to the sport, let me just tell you, like, you don't need to deal with jerks. You just don't. Yeah. Because there are so many people in this sport who are awesome, wonderful human beings, and they're not jerks. Yeah. And, some jerks will make you want, they'll want to make you believe that there's some sort of a gatekeeper to, progressing in the sport because, they're the head honcho on the group ride.
That guy exists everywhere.
Yeah.
For sure. Or gal.
It's baloney. There, if somebody, is making you think that, like, you have to get through them in order to progress or what, forget about it. You don't need jerks. Just keep reaching out until you find the people who are supportive and good.
Would you race with men sometimes too?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah. Well, so I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, and they don't understand. And they're always like, "Dad, you win the race?" And I'm always like, "No, I
you got to say yes this weekend." Heck yeah, you did.
But I didn't win the overall. I told.
Just stop with that.
No, but I have a bigger point on this. I say no. I always lose every race, but it's really fun, and I tried my best, and I got a little bit better.
And that's such a good teaching moment.
Exactly. And that's what I want to instill in my kids is it's more about the process and the trying rather than the outcome and the win. So if this is what I believe, if people and my kids focus on trying and grit and improving rather than like the final outcome, if they do that their entire lives, they will be successful in whatever they do.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's what makes you successful.
Bike racing is really just a metaphor, like, for all that stuff.
Oh, dude.
That's it.
Actually,
sorry. I'm starting to get high guy with that one.
I've got a really good story about this. So back in Connecticut, I work with a nonprofit called the Connecticut Cycling Advancement Program, and they work with a lot of young kids and developing junior ranks. So I went out to speak and be present at one of their road camp days, and these kids were between the ages of 11 and 14. Lots of really funny stories from that day.
I'm sure. Kids like that, yeah.
We rode 80 miles.
Whoa.
We rode 80 miles, and at the end of it, their coach said, okay, guys, what's our goal today? And all the kids said, to find our limit. And he said, okay, we just rode 80 miles. How many of you can keep pedaling? And they all raised their hands. And he said, okay, guess what we're going to do?
Whoa. And
he said, Amber and I are going to go, and we're going to go do 2 climbs. Amber and I are going to ramp up the pace, and we're going to drop you. But what I want you to do is hang on as long as you can. And he's like, I don't care when or where you get dropped. I don't care where it is. I just want you to feel 100% sure that you hit your limit today, whatever that is. So we went out to this climb. I was riding really hard for the record. These kids are fast.
Yeah, kids are crazy fast. Walk KG is great for kids, yeah.
But we get to the top of the hill, and of course, the kids start, straggling up one by one, and there's big gaps, and we had to wait pretty long time for the last kid to come up the hill. And by that time, all of his friends have already caught their breath. They're at the top. They're all fresh. And here he is just still slogging up the hill, like face is red, tongue is dragging, like he's weaving, like this kid emptied the tank. And I kind of sat there watching this scene for a moment thinking, wow, this could go either way, right? Especially at this age where kids can be super mean. And, I'm kind of like, how's this going to play out? So he comes like weaving up to the group, and all of his friends, they kind of looked at each other, and they looked at him, and they said, respect, man.
Respect.
Awesome.
And like 2 of the kids that beat him up the hill said, oh man, I feel like I didn't go hard enough because they saw how steady he was.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's the culture that we need.
Yeah.
We need the people who are winning the races to turn around to the person who got dropped and say, dude, that was awesome. Good on you for, being willing to be vulnerable and come out and learn something today. Thanks for being a part of the group. Thanks for making the race bigger and the peloton, just
Something.
welcoming and hey, like congratulating people for that learning process and recognizing that it's not about the outcome.
Sherry's got a question for you. She says, what is Amber's post-race or post-win celebratory meal?
Oh, it would depend on where I was. But when I very first started racing, my now husband, then boyfriend, and I had our ritual was if either of us want to race, we would go buy like a really fine Belgian beer. And have it to
nice.
us. And that was a really fun one.
Chad's like, yeah.
That resonates with Chad over there.
Every time.
Every workout.
Win or lose.
Mostly every day. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you guys if you guys have one that you really like post-win.
I had In-N-Out when I won my race.
Is that what you like to do?
Well, I don't know.
Do you have like a thing, I guess?
You know what? It's whatever my craving is, and then I go for it. So if I'm craving chocolate or barbecue or or alcohol, just indulge in my craving all the way. Like so much that I feel
just go for it.
That it is I don't it takes the craving away.
Yeah.
Right? If you really go into it, like I have to go into enough. You can't just have like a few fries.
Exactly.
Got to fully sate it.
What do you have same for you, Chad, or any specific
Couple
thing?
beers, the meal's flexible, and then a pan of brownies.
Ooh, yeah.
A pan.
Yeah, I like
But
that.
I think the key component here is that you do something to celebrate.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, and whether it's a ritual or something. A swim coach that I worked with a long time ago, I remember I had shoulder surgery and I was coming back and I was trying to figure out, stroke mechanics and he was like, and I was really struggling with this one aspect of it, and I finally like got it this once, and he was like, okay, quick, do a dance. And I was like, what? And he's like, just do something goofy to like celebrate the fact that you just got this feeling right. And I was like, are you kidding me? And he goes, yeah, you have to reinforce to your brain that this is what you want to do. So I think, there's a lot to be said for just celebrating the victories, big and small.
Yeah, and they don't have to be a race win either. In fact,
just a victory.
Yeah, at the EWS qualifier this year, I decidedly did not win at all. I was very far behind, but I accomplished my goal. Yeah. And so thereafter, I have my Doritos and lime soda. That's what I always have.
And like those process goals, make a deal with yourself. Like my high school swimming coach used to bet me a steak dinner once in a while if I could get to like, the 150 meter mark in a 200 free race in a certain amount of time. And like a couple times I made the goal by like 1/100 of a second. He was like, son of a gun. We'd have to go get a steak dinner. But it's great. It's super fun.
It's a good one.
Jonathan buys that soda before he even does the race. I've been with him. Yep, he keeps in there. He's like, I know I'm going to do it.
Yeah. When you know you can do it, it's good motivation.
I have two questions in a row. First, Dave Fish says, congrats on the Reno High Hall of Fame.
Oh, thank you.
I think, too, the other famous person, I bet he's in there, Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid, went to Reno High.
No, really?
Did you not know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's like, the Karate Kid went to Reno High.
It's kind of sad because I dislike his character in that movie. Yeah.
I'm sure the guy's fine.
I'm sure he's great. Yeah.
Second question from Kathy. This is, Amber, do you lift weights, do yoga, meditation, any other mental training in addition to your structure training? So let's start with lifting weights.
Yes, lifting weights, super important, especially because cycling is not necessarily a weight-bearing sport, and coming from swimming, lifting weights is hugely important just for the health of your bones and bone density and all of that. I think it's also just good for injury prevention. And I learned the hard way that, what specific overuse injuries arise in swimming, in swimming and cycling. And whatever sport you're in, just do a quick web search on what the overuse injuries are in your sport, because chances are there's like some super simple things that you can do to prevent all of that.
What do you do?
Well, in cycling, most cyclists are really lateral quad dominant. And so what that does, it'll start to pull the tissue that attaches to the patella, and it'll pull your patella out to the sides. Yep. So then your patella doesn't track properly, and it can make you more susceptible to chondromalacia, things like that. So any kind of external hip rotation, internal femoral rotation, stretching, making sure that you foam roll those lateral quads, before you're doing any kind of weightlifting, or even doing that before a cycling session, can help inhibit them and get you to recruit more VMO, which is the vastus medialis. And so that's kind of on the inside, and so that'll help counterbalance that tug of war on the patella. And then, of course, back and neck issues are big ones for cyclists. So working on, I know you've got some stuff for thoracic mobility. That stuff's just super important. So knowing what those things are and incorporating all of that into a routine is really important. And I think strength training is a big one just for health.
Yoga?
Yeah.
I don't do yoga, and I feel like I should, and I have felt like I should for so many years.
Dude, there's a real
And
social pressure with that.
There's so much pressure with the yoga,
There's
and I don't.
social pressure with yoga.
And
for
I
sure.
do. The people I know who do it love it, and I think there's a lot to be said for it. It's just like I have a hard time with it. Maybe it's because I took that one Bikram class once and I almost died, and like I just can't do
smelled
it.
terrible. Yeah.
Meditation?
Meditation, I try. I'm not good at it, and I'm really working on this one. But I think getting back to that autonomic central nervous system and limbic system, we have this tendency to look at autonomic versus voluntary nervous system functions as like there's this wall of China between them, but there's not, because your breath is something that's actually autonomic and voluntary. So it's a way that you can kind of tap into that autonomic system. And I do think that especially with crashing and even negative emotional experiences on the bike, it affects that autonomic system because it kind of affects on a very primitive level your threat detection threshold. And I think that breath work, and the longer I've been in the sport, the more I'm starting to really believe this. I think that breath work helps you tap into that autonomic system and kind of recalibrate it, especially after maybe a really traumatic experience. And when I say traumatic, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a bike crash. Like it could have just been like a race that was overwhelming and, you know, you felt terrified the whole time, and or you just had a really bad day and it's really affecting you. Like all of those things are going to... Your autonomic nervous system doesn't know what's going on in the outside world. All it knows is how you're responding emotionally. And so it's going to try to take its best guess at what's going on. And if you're responding emotionally with a lot of anxiety over something, it's going to take that as like something threatening is going on.
Yeah.
And it's going to affect your system. So I do think that breath work, and whether that's meditation or yoga, I think that that's super, super important for kind of keeping that system balanced and healthy and responding well.
And Amber, I don't think we mentioned, what did you study? What's your degree in?
Oh,
We didn't mention that. Thanks,
so
John.
my undergrad degree, I have a bachelor in human biology, and then and I did do a lot of exercise physiology in that, and then a master's in oceanography.
Got it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
From Stanford.
From Stanford. Yeah.
That's a cool life. Speak multiple languages, live in Europe, went to Stanford, pro bike racer.
It's pretty great.
Yeah.
A couple more questions.
Yeah.
This one is from Owen. He says, speaking of air travel, question to Amber, does she travel with sponsor correct bike travel bags, or does she have a personal preference?
Okay. So when I did have a bike bag sponsor, I did travel with sponsor correct travel bags.
Yeah.
Now I get to pick, and I really like the Gavilon BFF.
Gavilon, you said?
Gavilon BFF.
Huh.
It is, I think the frame size limit is 57. If you have a 57 or smaller, it will fit in this bag, which is 62 inches.
Nate's out. Yeah. Yeah. Bummer. Oh, yeah, you're at a 58,
close,
don't you? Yeah.
But the thing with this one is you have to remove the fork and the front brake, which
is
is
this
like an
like the
extra 5
backpack
minutes.
one?
It's not a backpack. So that's the Ninja, which is
yeah.
also good. But
Yeah.
the beauty of this is if you can get your bike into a bag that A, doesn't look like a bag, and B, is actually within 62 inches, then after some time I've earned some status, so I don't have to pay for baggage anymore, so the bike actually flies free.
Nice.
That said, I'm a much bigger fan of bikeflights.com.
Yeah. It's easier.
Like, they are
Totally easier.
amazing. And full disclosure, I am an ambassador for them, but it's only because I'm such a huge fan of what they do.
Yeah.
It's so much less expensive. Well, if you're paying for bags, it's like, I think I can send my bike across country, like coast to coast, for like $40 to $50.
What?
Yeah.
Do you have to pack it?
You have to put it into a bike box, but you can put it into a bike box. It doesn't have to be into like a soft-sided bag. You can put it into a bike box. On their website, they actually provide you with boxes. Like you can buy, boxes from them, or, hard cases or whatever. You can actually ship. You can ship it in a soft-sided case. You can ship it in a bike box. You can ship it in a hard-sided case. But it ships via FedEx. Their customer service is amazing, and you don't have to deal with dragging it through the airport. You don't have to deal with TSA undoing your amazing packing job.
Where do you get it then?
You ship it to a bike shop or another
Yep.
person's house.
And then you can pay the bike
A
shop
hotel.
then to build it if you want.
If you want to, yeah.
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 We should do that 'cause-
Depends. The cost depends on the location too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, we usually fly United. I think they just raised it to $200 each way.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like, and then you
Yeah.
got to pull on it, which is annoying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty complex.
We should be someone. If you're listening, you're from Bike Flights.
I'm telling
You
you.
know how much we would talk about it?
a lot.
Yeah, we do it a lot.
Oh boy.
Yeah, no, they are awesome.
Cool. I guess that covers it
Yeah,
for
that's
me
good.
on this end.
Thank
we're
you so
already up to
much.
the time.
Cool. Yeah, thanks
Amber,
you
this has
guys
been
for
awesome.
having me.
Yeah,
Thanks.
of course.
And thanks
Oh,
everyone for your
Oh,
questions.
if people, can you go putting you on the spot, but forum.trainer.com. If people have more questions, can you spend some time and answer them on that thread?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, so we'll have a thread in there, and you'll just be able to search episode 193, or you can search Amber's name, Amber Pierce, and then you can find it within there. If people want to find out more about you, Amber, or the things that you're involved in, where should they go?
So I'm on social media, Twitter and Instagram as Amber Malika. That's AMBERMALIKA. It's my middle name.
Got it.
And then my website is just amberpierce.us.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. Pierce spelled P-E-A-R-C-E.
Oh, sorry, P-I-E-R-C-E. So
P-I-E.
Amber P-I-E-R-C-E, like pie.
Perfect. Yeah, that's easy. There we go. Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks again, Amber. If you have any questions on the topics that we've covered today, once again, head over to forum.trainerroad.com. You can throw those in. If you have coaching questions, I know that we have a ton of them that we have to get to next week since we've taken 2 weeks away from that normal schedule. We'll be getting to those, and you can submit those at trainerroad.com/podcast. And if you're interested in anything that we do here at Trainer Road, please check out trainerroad.com, review the podcast, share Trainer Road with your friends. We're looking forward to talking to you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.